welcome you and welcome our presenters. Tonight we are led in a forum on faith formation as it is practiced within virtual spaces and the challenges and opportunities we have before us in this difficult time for the next weeks and months likely. And all that we can learn from this time. So we are led this evening by two colleagues, Dr. Laurel Koepf-Taylor, who is our professor of Bible and also is this semester, this year, teaching our course in religious education, and a student in our Doctor of Ministry program and a religious educator of some extensive experience, Sally Thomas. And so we are delighted to have them with us, and I am going to hand it over to them in just 1 minute. I am going to be asking you all if during the presentation you would keep your mics muted, and I see that you are all in that mode, and I thank you for that. And that will help with feedback and audio quality. And also, if you would engage with our presenters and one another by asking questions and offering comments in the chat function of Zoom. As the presentation continues for about 20 or so minutes, I will be collecting those questions, and then I will pose them and Mary will pose them to our leaders when they are finished with their presentation. I also want to just give a little teaser for next week. Next week is Holy Week. I'm sure that's not lost on any of you. And we are going to be in for a treat. The Eden Black Alumni Association is offering a forum on the 7 Last Words liturgical practice, which is a wonderful, iconic Holy Week practice within the African American worship traditions. And we are going to be led in a virtual 7 Last Words service. It will be very different from a traditional one because it won't be 3 hours long. So each of our presenters have taken the challenge of a 3.5 minute word. So the last words of Jesus from the cross, and those are being presented by members of the Eden Black Alumni Association, from the president of that association, Reverend Dr. Anthony Scott, also known as the Bishop, and Christopher Ware, Dr. Christopher Ware, also pastor and chaplain in Houston, Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, Reverend Dr. Deetra Baker, and several more. So we're excited about that and welcome you back here next Thursday at 7 o'clock for what promises to be both an educational experience in learning about the 7 Last Words tradition and in getting a virtual experience of that service. So it should be a wonderful way to add to your Holy Week. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our colleagues, Laurel and Sally, and welcome them to lead the forum.
Thank you. Thank you for that welcome, and thank you all of you for being here to share with us this conversation about faith formation and how faith formation can take place in the home when you or those you serve, like me, have children in the home all of the time. So we are going to start. Let me get our images up here. So our title is Lemonade from Lemons, recognizing that many of us had not planned on spending quite as much time at home as we presently are, and many of us with children in the home had not planned on spending quite so much time with our children. In particular, that we hadn't planned on spending Holy Week at home and Holy Week with our children and Holy Week trying to explain Holy Week to our children. And so this is an opportunity to recognize, reclaim, and reimagine what faith formation can be at home for those of us working with children in the home, and remotely for those of us trying to reach out to people of all ages who are in their homes together. We're going to be looking at faith formation, and we're going to be looking at what faith formation can be, specifically for children, but also for the spiritual guides who support them. And our goal is to offer an overarching approach, as well as a few practical examples that we hope will serve as springboards for supporting this kind of faith formation in your home and in the homes of those that you serve. I have seen so many excellent examples of worship that is brought into people's homes when it wasn't something we had a lot of time to prepare ourselves to do, and yet we're doing it anyway. And the same can be the case for the ways that we think about faith formation and the ways we think about learning and becoming the church together. Sally?
Yeah, I just want to add my welcome, and before we get started, say I see some other Christian educators on here. Many of you I know and some of you I don't. But one of the most important things is I sat in for this session last week, and last week it was about pastoring through crisis and chaos. And last week what we talked about was we were sort of in a honeymoon phase, getting used to things. And I am amazed and impressed, but also aware that it's been a week of pastoring and caring, taking care of so many details for all of us as professionals in the church. And so how we were feeling last week may be very different than how we're feeling this week. So just take a minute to check in with yourself as you come tonight. Weary, energized, hopeful, overwhelmed. We're glad you're here for your love, the love of children. So welcome.
When we think about children and their participation in the family of faith, often we think about Luke 18. We think about Jesus as the one who says, "Let the little children come to me and do not try to stop them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, whoever doesn't receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it." And when we think of this, there are a lot of ways that we've thought about what it means to be a child and what it means to receive the kingdom of God as a child does. And one of the ways that this can be is with curiosity, with questions, unashamed of how much we do not know and excited about everything that we can discover together in community. And that's a model that we want to offer for the kind of faith formation that can take place in the home, without being one more thing that you now have to do while you're working from home and parenting from home and suddenly homeschooling from home and trying to put everything online. So when we think about faith formation, it doesn't have to be another thing to do, but it can be a way of being with one another that's shaped by curiosity.
Just to take that a little further, faith formation is so much bigger than just education or Sunday school. You know, in the last 20 years, we've made a change from talking about Christian education in many of the churches and Sunday school to faith formation in general. And in looking at formation through that lens, think about a couple of things that come up for us. That when we see faith formation, we're not seeing, especially now in this context, we're talking about children, we're not seeing children as empty vessels, as coming needing to be filled up by what we have. One of the tricks in there is sometimes we are so full of our own divine spark that we want for the children what we feel. And what we're going to invite you to do tonight, as we talk about what faith formation really is to enter through that lens of curiosity, that lens of humility, that wanting to be a witness, an accompanier, to see faith formation opportunities as sometimes planned or spontaneous, less of a pulling someone towards information, and maybe more of a dance. Sometimes dances are waltzes. They're a little more orchestrated, but everybody wants to be there. And sometimes dances are dance parties that happen when you completely don't expect it. And then you strike while the iron's hot for those formation episodes. So how do you know if faith formation is really happening? Here's what we look for. In faith formation, you will feel safe, and everybody will feel safe to speak up for themselves, to talk about that elusive presence of God, to recognize that all who are together, small children, older people, nonverbal people, everybody's there as a witness, a teacher, a fellow human, and has agency in the formation that's going on. Most important is that faith formation follows the energy rather than being confined by an agenda. It's the entry point. It's the growth. It's the seed. It's the sprout. One of the things I was thinking about today was Palm Sunday's coming up. I want people to know about the jubilant Jesus coming into Jerusalem for the last time. But maybe the place to start is a child's question about a donkey and how much it can carry and how it smells and what it really looks like. There's so much more to know. So think about these things for ingredients in faith formation. It's not about having a magic curriculum. It's about having wonderful people who are open-hearted and willing to meet children where they are. Anything can become curriculum, but it's what we do with it and how we welcome it. So there's a certain mindset involved. We trust that God is already active in each and every person in a unique way. We honor that children are just who they're supposed to be. We're not waiting for them to be evangelists when they're adults. They are naturally who they are and who God wants them to be. We're not waiting for them to be adults. We're not forming them. That will come. And that we're all journeying together to seek God and understand how God is present. So what do we do with that? One of the things that we like to think about is that children have native languages. They naturally speak the language of play and the language of story. Now, when I say play, play has a couple aspects that make it play instead of pseudo play. People can force you to play, but it's not really play. Real play is voluntary. It requires concentration. When your concentration's broken, that play's over. It feels good to do it. It's like blowing bubbles. So forcing play doesn't really happen. Thinking play is going on as pseudo play. So think about play like that. Children speak the language of play, and for them, it's their work. That's what Maria Montessori taught us. That's what they're supposed to be doing. So we as adults need to enter into that space instead of wish they weren't playing. What's real story? Real story is, well, it's story that's given freely. It's not given with an expectation that information will be parroted back, that the storyteller will receive adulation or snaps for doing such a good job. Real story is given from the heart, trusting that God is at work in each and every heart and that the children will absorb the story that they're meant to absorb. So thinking about that, real story and real play, and what it was like maybe for you in the Wayback Machine, I'm going to invite you to think about sometime in your childhood. Think about the adults, not your parents, but maybe one adult who you knew took you seriously. And I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box what they did that made you know they were taking you seriously. Just jot that down for us to all see. I'm just going to take a minute to lift up what I'm seeing, trends. They listened, they paid attention, they included me, they took me seriously, they got down on my level. They knew my name. They treated me like one of them. Mrs. Love listened to my ideas and really cared. Take out any book from the library. Listen patient and calmly. They spend time. Friends, everything we need to know about how to be part of the faith formation equation with children is encapsulated in your comments, and we didn't even read them all right there. They took me seriously. They listened. They got down on my level. I didn't feel rush. They knew my name.
So we want to recognize right now that there are some great resources out there for faith formation. And we're going to share some of those with you later on. But the main thing we want to communicate really is that for those of you with children in the home, you are the resource that they need most. And not you with your full attention being perfect 100% of the time, but you being, you living fully, you living curiously, and you being a good enough parent. That's the resource that they need. And so there are great faith formation resources out there. We don't want to say don't use any of those, they're terrible. But we want you to know that for those of you serving families with young children, to be able to empower them to give what they have as faith formation, rather than think that they have to know absolutely every single thing about the Bible and know all of the answers to their children's many, many unanswerable questions. You don't have to do that. You don't have to know everything. In fact, one of the most important things that you can do in the faith formation of young children is model not just curiosity, but a confident, I don't know. I used to work at a congregation in Connecticut, and the children in that congregation had a habit of asking me unanswerable questions in front of absolutely everybody in the entire congregation. And I imagine you've seen this before. And I loved being able to answer, I don't know. This is what I think. And some other people think something else. And some other people think something else. And here are a few of the things that some people believe. But we come to church together to try and work that out in community. Trouble is, right now, we don't come to the church building together to work that out in community. We work it out in community in the many ways that we are actively reaching out to one another. But we can also say to the children who are in our care, I don't know, but we come together as a family and as a family of faith to try to work that out together. So one of the most important things that you can do is support parents and grandparents and foster parents and all of those caregivers out there by letting them know that they are good enough faith formation leaders. And maybe they might come back to the congregation ready to be good enough faith formation leaders in the congregation as well.
Amen to that. Taking a step away, I want to offer you a quote that I came across this week from Brene Brown about boredom. She said, "Boredom is sacred. We shouldn't deny our children this holy experience." This is one of the biggest traps in faith formation, to think we have to fix it. And I contend that maybe the presence of it, even model it. I can be bored too, but one of the neatest things about being bored is what comes after it. Oops, did you lose me? Okay, so here with the boredom, one of the things that Laurel and I want to offer up to you is boredom is a pathway to learning how to sit with that still, small voice. Because children have very little chance to walk home from school, right now they're inside so much, they don't have much of a chance to be with their own thoughts. So embrace boredom, model it, and look forward to the possibility of an answer like, you feel bored? I love it when I get bored because something exciting always happens afterwards. One of the things, as we start to reimagine what faith formation is, I am going to invite you to think with me about something I'm working on for my D-Min project. And that is noticing that families have a lot of screen time, are very scheduled, and are very, very busy. So I started to think about this way before we had to worry about a virus or being at home. But one of the things after years as a Christian educator, I started to wonder is how families might change if they sat down together every day and had a short conversation about their day, started to relate to each other, and had something, if you're familiar with St. Ignatius or Ignatius of Loyola, of an examen, just checking in and reviewing your day. So I would like to offer you a preview of what I'm working on for my D-Min project. What I'm inviting families to do is sit down together every day or find a time of the day when they have a habit that works for them. Brushing your teeth, being in the car, going to school, and a time of ritual and liturgy. Not to stop and say this is a liturgy or this is a ritual, but the researchers call it stacking with a habit. That's putting one habit on top of another one. And that's something that works really well for faith formation in the home. We've talked about that. We'll continue to talk about that. So for my husband and I, and when our children were home, it was making dinner, not sitting down at dinner. But think of a couple of times where you could stack a new habit if you have children at home or if you're supporting children. What's a good time that you do something every day? And then the invitation in my project, and perhaps you'll want to learn more, sign up, is to ask each other these same 4 questions every day. I wonder what part of the day you liked the best. That's question number 1. And it always goes in this order. Everybody gets a chance to answer. It doesn't have to be long. I liked the Zoom call I was on. I liked getting outside. I liked making banana bread. I liked it how my mommy cut off the sides of my banana bread. If you were on the call earlier, you might have witnessed that. So the first question is, I wonder what part of today you liked the best. And you can't get that question wrong. Think of it as a breadcrumb into a deeper conversation. The second question, I wonder what part of the day you think was the most important part of your day. Okay, it's a little more complex. Doesn't have to be more than a word or 2. I wonder what part of the day you liked the best. I wonder what part of the day was the most important. Children are asking their parents, children are asking each other, everybody answers. It's not just a top down, it's flat. I wonder what part of the day had the most energy for you. So can you see that with the first 3 questions, we've already started to do some theological reflection without putting God language in it. We're inviting people into a deeper conversation. I wonder what part of the day you liked the best. I wonder what was the most important. I wonder where you felt the most energy. And over time, that language might change to say, I wonder where you felt closest to God. And the final question is, I wonder what part of this day we could have taken out and you would still have all the day you need. As you can see, the order is important. If we messed it up, we couldn't go as deep sequentially. So part of this project is checking in every day. Part of it is the ritual that we know is so important to faith formation and makes children feel safe. And part of it is if families know how to talk about regular things, when things get stressful, I don't know, maybe during a pandemic. They have a language in place to continue to talk about difficult things because they've been laying down these ways to talk. One of the things to think about, and the last thing I'll say about this is, there's this beautiful concept in biology, but I just came across it in a new poem by Kim Stafford called tropism. It's how plants turn their faces to the sun. And when children have a chance to sit in your light and each other's, it's a kind of tropism. It's kind of spiritual tropism. But they can't turn if they don't have time. You can't turn back to them, and you all can't turn to God if there's not this time and this ritual built in.
So when we think about this, right, there are different families that have done different variations on this, and these are excellent questions that Sally is asking here. In my family, we've been doing something similar where we talk about what we're thankful for. We have a gratitude practice every day at dinner, and we've been doing this for years. And then this year at Christmas, my youngest, I had him making rolled beeswax candles for everyone on his Christmas list, not knowing that his class also had him making rolled beeswax candles for us. And as soon as we had this surfeit of rolled beeswax candles in the house, he was certain that every time we did our gratitude ritual, we needed to light one of the candles. We needed to light a candle before we started. We needed to put it out when we were done. And that was something that he had been missing about our home church. And so he took our ritual and heightened it. And this is one of the ways that we can see that there is something about that ritual and that sense of the sacred that really deepens our relationships and deepens those conversations that we already sometimes have between running from one place to another. But it's important to make something of a ritual of it as well.
Just riffing off of that, one of the things I'd like to lift up is in just hearing that really important but not terribly grand story of faith formation, except it's the biggest thing in the world. There was a receptivity, there was a willingness to change or what's the word, rechart your course. Like it took a little bit of a change, wasn't a big deal, but your antenna were tuned to make that change. There was the element of ritual that you've discussed, but there was also taking what a child said seriously, seeing him in the context of his family, and valuing that. All the things, may I remind you, that you all put in the chat box about what was important about adults taking you seriously. So that's not to say that we won't make mistakes in faith formation. We don't have it all figured out. We may think we're following and not be in the energy at all, but feel free to make mistakes, because if you are open, if you're ready, and if you're really listening to children, the story, the play, the ritual, you'll probably find your way as you keep practicing. So Laurel, Holy Week's coming up.
Yes, Holy Week's coming up. We've only mentioned that a few times, and I'm sure it doesn't raise your anxiety at all when we do that. Holy Week's coming, and many of us have put our community worship online. And one of the things that we can think about as we think about the multiple worship services of Holy Week is that any worship service that has been put into the home via these online resources, if that home has children in it, there's no place else for them to be. And so every single online worship service, whether we're thinking about it or not, is going to be a multi-generational worship service. And the question becomes then, are we being intentional about creating multi-generational worship in the home? Or are we making it so perhaps one parent has to chase the children while the other one experiences worship? So one of the things that we can do is find ways for people to engage with all of their senses that certainly reaches children and creates multiple access points for multiple intelligences, but also reaches people of all ages who engage best when their hands are busy, when their hands are in something. One worship resource that's going to be coming through Worship Ways in the UCC that I prepared this week is creating a Holy Week scavenger hunt for things that you probably already have in your home that represent some of the events of Holy Week. Finding a washcloth or a sponge. Finding a coin when you're thinking about cleansing the temple, right? Finding a piece of bread. Finding a flower to think about the garden, right? So whatever it is, what are some things that you might already have in your home that you can send children out to search for and have them bring back into the family worship space and interact with, where they can use that washcloth to pretend to wash somebody's feet, right? Where they can share that bread together, where they can snore quietly next to the flower and then be told to wake up, right? Whatever it is that you feel comfortable doing in the kind of worship and the style of worship that's appropriate to the community and appropriate to the family, finding those access points so that children have ways of interacting with the worship, not being distracted from the worship, but interacting with it from multiple different access points. And this is something that can be spread throughout the week or build throughout the week, or just be repeated, the same story over and over and over, because that repetition really does reinforce the way that we connect to it, not just the way we remember it, but the way that we connect to it. This can link to your virtual worship, or this could just be a family ritual at home to talk about Holy Week in a way that's accessible.
So lemonade out of lemons. No one expected to be home. If you are a children's pastor or Christian educator, you certainly didn't expect to be Zooming or pulling together online resources or inundating all your families with many resources, because perhaps your lead pastor says, I want to get this out, I want to get this out, I want to get this out, and I want to get this out. In my informal poll of my other churches that I consult with, I think everybody, if they're in leadership, is feeling like, is this enough resources? Is it not enough? And maybe the take-home message is what do you need from us? Maybe there's a liturgy even, or a ritual to sharing information. You'll hear from us every Thursday. You'll hear. I think we're going to be in this for a few more weeks, friends. And is that I don't think we need to be all things to all people, but regular things. A liturgy of communication, a ritual of support. So you'll know faith formation by how it feels. It's about inquiry rather than instruction. We're modeling engaged listening. We can speak the language of true story. We can speak the language of true play. And when your family wants more of it, then we're probably doing it well. Thank you.
So this is Mary Schaller-Bloffes. I got back on the Zoom call and was able to hear the presentation. Sally and Laurel, thank you so much for your presence and the way that you are modeling what we all can do in faith formation. If there are questions or comments that you as participants would like to make, why don't you go ahead and write those in the chat, and I will raise those up to Sally and Laurel. And while you're thinking of what those questions might be and putting them in the chat, you've done such a good job. I'll get us started off. So you've done such a good job of giving us examples of that ritual of support and the liturgy of communication. Can you say a little bit about, even more about how the ways that we do Christian faith formation in this time could lead to a new model and new ways of doing faith formation?
One of the things I like to say is we learn to be church by doing church. We don't learn to be church by being told how to do church. And so if we use this faith formation in the family model, this can be an opportunity for us to practice being church in our ways of being every day. in the way that we interact with one another, so that faith formation is intentionally happening all the time, because faith formation is happening all the time. Everything we do, everything we encounter, everything we say, it's a part of how children in particular, but really people of all ages, continue to be formed in the faith. And the question becomes, is our implicit message, the message we're giving by how we are with each other, matching the explicit message that we try to convey through a particular curriculum? And so this can really be a way of remembering how to be a multi-generational church and how to be church with each other and be intentional about how that is doing faith formation. And for those of us in smaller congregations, that it's okay, and in fact, perhaps glorious, that you have 3 or 4 children who you're doing a great job with, and you don't have a class for every grade, and you don't have enough volunteers to make that happen. But you have a fabulous opportunity to be the church together.
I'd also just in that all that glory, I'm thinking about the families at home who are not churched, the ones who don't feel, especially parents who don't feel capable. I don't know how to meet my child's spiritual needs. What do I do with that? So this is a time when, being home during the time of a pandemic, these are the questions that are going to come up. These are important questions. And one of the things we learn how to do is mentor people who are our next door neighbors, who we meet at the grocery store, who we listen to with that pastoral ear. We'll send out a resource page that'll link with this. And one of the things I'm thinking about are the times when parents are tearing their hair out, and we sort of, not being those parents, can come alongside and say, "You're doing such a good job. How can I help?" I think those are the times. The faith formation will follow. Children wanting to go to the Bible, that all comes when they know it's a safe place to talk about things.
Thank you, and you've moved into the question that Zipporah Lee posed to us of resources written for parents or faith formators in order to empower them to be curious or to play themselves. Wondering if you have those resources or thoughts on approach.
I'll start us off. Let me back up. I'm a Christian educator, but I also am very fond of a way of being with families and children called Godly Play, which is a Montessori-inspired approach to offering the stories of our faith together. And there are, coming out of every single curriculum, there's a Facebook page, there's a educators page for every denomination. There's so many resources. My invitation or my thought is we need to find our tribe. We need to find our people who seem to speak the same language. So one of the things, the resources I would recommend is, I no longer live in St. Louis, but when I did, I was able to attend the saucy meetings at Eden of Christian educators who met once a month and offered support and curriculum. And as far as parents go, I think we, we'll provide resources, what we think works, but I think it's about asking questions and finding your tribe. It's not about buying the right book or the curriculum. There's so many good books. There's so many good curriculums out there. The last thing I'll say is, I don't think it's about sitting your child in front of a TV and watching a Christian video unless you're sitting there with them. And afterwards you say something like, "I wonder what part you liked the best. I wonder what part was the most important," and really pulling it apart, being together and showing them that you're asking questions too.
Thank you. And we have Deb Krause, who's been putting some of the key points that you're making into the chat so that we'll have those to share in that kind of written form. A few folks have been adding some other resources to the chat, which is really helpful. Maybe to bring us to a close, you've been mostly speaking about faith formation and children. Are there
I think Mary might be a little frozen, but I think what she was wanting to ask was a question that Dennis has asked in the chat, which is, what about adult faith formation? Do you have any, particularly in this context that we're in, are there insights that you have about that? Yes, Mary, faith formation for adults, that you might share with us.
Well, I think faith formation is constant. And certainly as we experience church now, we know that not everybody has even had a foundational religious education, and faith, even in that we would even think of faith formation as something that we continue from childhood in that way. But really, faith formation is constant. And I would say that being able to be confident in your own curiosity as a child of God. I would hold all of this to an adult, although we feel like we need to tell adults this about children more frequently, but hold yourself in that same gentleness too. Mm-hmm. And hold your adult family in that same gentleness, in that same encouragement toward curiosity, and that same encouragement toward knowing that you are good enough.
Yes.
And on that, we are good enough. This has been rich. We are so grateful that everyone has joined us this evening, and we are going to be able to make these recordings available so that folks who weren't able at this particular hour to join us can do so. I want to remind you again of next week's Thursday night session with the Eden Black Alumni Association, 7 Words of the Cross. A reminder for you to sign up, register again for that session. We're trying to keep track of who all is in each session so that we can continue to build this community and to encourage one another. So, with thanks to our presenters, with thanks to all of you who are your authentic selves as we do faith formation, we'll wish you peace, and we will see you again next Thursday. Bye all.
God bless.